For background, we had posted on our LinkedIn group a question just sort of debating or asking about the role of the human researcher in this world of big data. And it was wonderful because we got a tremendously huge amount of response, I think 49 posts, and they were all very well thought out. And so today the idea was to have some researchers come up and just sort of debate the topic here in front of all of you and sort of get a discussion going. So if the panelists would like to come up, that would be great. I'll sit here on the end. I guess if I can start, Dana Stanley is on my far right. He is Vice President of Research at Fashion Playtes. And then next to him is Will Leach, who's the Senior Director of Insights and Strategy at uSamp. And then next to Will is Rich Timpone, who is the Senior Vice President at the Ipsos Science Center. And then Marwah, who just spoke, he's a cognitive scientist with Walmart Labs. I think as background, too, we'd like to keep this discussion very open. So if you have any questions as we're going along, we don't have a real set structure. So if anything comes up that you want to ask about, feel free to flag down somebody bearing a microphone, and we can kind of get things going. Again, just as background, here's what we kind of posted on the LinkedIn site. With all the talk of big data, web scraping, and other non-traditional information sources at the fingertips of marketers and researchers these days, what is the role of the individual researcher and or the research department? How can researchers stake their claim to be the guardians and gatherers of this information and reestablish marketing research as the rightful center of in-house data synthesis and analysis? So I guess to start off with, if somebody wants to address how do we kind of get into this situation where the role of the researcher is being questioned or wondered about with, from various internal audiences?
Well, I think we've seen at this conference a lot of discussion of examples of how rapidly technology is accelerating, and that is just really exponentially increased since there have been a number of discussions of when online research came into being. It's only getting faster. What I was struck by in the LinkedIn discussion was, notwithstanding kind of the traditional hand-wringing by researchers about, are we relevant? Are we just, the geeks in the corner? Almost universally, people thought, in different ways, and there were nuances, but almost everybody thought, yes, the human role is important, and people had a lot of, interesting details about that.
So, coming from a similar place, and the discussion really on the LinkedIn was very much about how important the human is. So I will take the computer side and I'll defend Skynet today. No, there really is about the integration. But how we got here is the trends that we've been talking about, online, mobile, the increasing datafication of our lives, the collecting of all the information, the storage, and the ability to actually start mining it creates opportunities to do things that we couldn't in the past. So how we got here is a good thing. The issue is that because of that, often the people from the technology side have abilities to mine, to look at things, and the critical importance of understanding the research, the integration, the holistic view of the consumer, how to act to do business interventions is what's often missed. So I think if we acknowledge the value of Skynet, but we need to keep control because it is about understanding integration and action.
Will or you have anything to add?
Sure. So I recently just talked about this, so I won't beat the Bible too hard about what I was just preaching. But there was an article that came out recently by HBR that says why your big data team needs a cognitive scientist. And I can defend that article and also tell you why your big data team doesn't need a cognitive scientist. But that article talked about how there are just certain types of data which don't necessarily make best for the statistical methods that data science would use. And there are going to be forms of data that do require a human to step in and really analyze them. And additionally, there was a McKinsey study that talked about how there's going to be a lack of professionals who have these skills, potentially up to 100,000. I don't know if the year was by 2017 or something of that nature, but data scientists are people too. So by all means, the analysis they're doing, although far more technically developed in the sense that they're not necessarily looking and analyzing the data themselves, they're building models to do that. That skill is going to be vastly required into the future. So between the two, there will be a requirement for human researchers of both the skill set that is perhaps more driven towards the cognitive side, as well as individuals who have the data science abilities to make value of this data we have.
Yeah, and I'll just add kind of a third module onto that. So when I was at Pepsi for years, we wrestled with this quite a bit. Like, what's the future of a marketing researcher, and where's our value when you can have a chief or somebody in the finance group send out surveys, and they have insights as well, just like we did. And so, what is our new role? What we found is our role. What the CEO was asking for researchers was all the typical stuff. We want to know the whys behind what's happening with humans and with our customers. But they kind of got sick of us coming back to them with, well, here's what's happening, here's what we think is why. Because when you transition that information off to a design company, any company, advertising agency, whatever, something was always lost in translation, almost always. So what we were asked to start doing was actually designing for behaviors. And that was our charge, because who else can actually influence behaviors besides the people that study human behavior? So I would say that if you want to be more relevant in this field, you have to use cognitive psychology, and people just have pure empathy for people and start designing solutions. And that's where we started to push our group in the insights groups. We're bringing in designers, behavioral designers, to not only study human behavior, but then say, okay, therefore, since we found that this heuristic is being used, we think that now our displays should be red. We think you should use these types of adjectives. When you're able to then take that kind of work, employ that or deploy that into an actual market, test market, and see the results very quickly, insights becomes really, really important, because up until then, we were just measurers. When actually you're designing for behavioral interventions and changing people's behaviors, increasing sales, increasing baskets, things like that, you'd be really surprised how your budgets increase and how people are being asked to come into that group. We had a massive group of people wanting to come into insights, because finally, we weren't just measures of data. We're actually people that were changing behaviors and increasing sales.
One of the points that a lot of the people in the LinkedIn posts made in terms of what is the role, they said the value of the human researcher is to sort of frame the question so that the end client knows what they want to find out. That's obviously something that a machine can't really do at this point. But that, so framing the question and then analyzing and sort of acting on the fly as new information comes in and being able to change what you're looking for, that sort of creativity, and then also giving the what should we do now after you get the information, those I think are three sort of core things that they need to do. Can you add any other skill sets? Or
I'll add in this one. So, especially in massive organizations, it's just all these companies are made up of thousands of people making emotional decisions, right? And so, if you have empathy for meetings and the environmental factors, the social factors, the personal factors that are influencing decisions on whether the guy's going to walk out and go to a golf game or stay in your meeting, right? Technology will never allow us to understand that kind of empathy. There's no way. So if you think of all these thousands of decisions, and you can be in a meeting and understand that the guy in front of you, your marketer, who's about to make a decision, is in a bad mood, you need to back off of that. Like, one of the biggest frustrations I had when I was a researcher over at Pepsi was that you get your budget in January. So you go out and you crush research. You get as much research done before they pull your budget. When I'm finished with the research, what do you want to do? You want to go give people the results. You want to be seen as important. But there's ebbs and flows in any business, right? It just is. There's a natural cycle. And if you don't understand as a researcher that your research project that you completed in February isn't really needed until April or May, and you need to be able to hold back on that, then you're talking to an audience that's not that receptive, and that's why you don't get any value, because you're talking about research on the shelf. A lot of times that's why. It's not because it's bad insight, it's because you're getting an insight at the wrong time. I don't think technology will help you understand the ebbs and flows of businesses and when you should, just by calendarization, right? But being across from somebody and knowing that this guy hasn't eaten in a while, right? It's a late afternoon, he's really tired. That's not the most important time for you to really try to strain and make them strain to understand insights, right? Back off a little bit on that. So that was another key insight that we had to start using to really get adoption of our insights, was understanding when and where do you actually put a research study out there.
Sure.
Another thing, just to address the question about the basically the different types of data and the different types of people who will be analyzing it. Big data simply means that we can suck in massive amounts of data. Now, the nature of that data is irrelevant. It just has to be data. So if you're sucking in weather data, then it isn't necessarily a system, especially if you're talking about cognitive psychology being applied, where you need a data scientist to build the methodology that would create the product recommendations that go along with weather types. You just need someone who knows about or can study how weather interacts with people, and he can suddenly suck in data from every zip code in the United States, the weather patterns, and create a system that allows people to get product recommendations congruent with the weather that they're experiencing, which should, again, like I mentioned earlier, delight them. Another thing is that this data is just data. So depending on who you give the data to, they're going to frame a question very differently. So if I were to give my Walmart data to a nutritionist, the questions they would ask would be vastly different than the questions I would ask. If I were to give it to a demographer or someone who studies food deserts, someone who studies social inequality or food stamp programs, there would be very, very different questions. And as of now, the data resides within corporations because we have the ability to build these data centers that house and store this data. And we have the data sets similar to the U.S. government has the census data. You know, it's these big groups that have this power. But really, the value of big data to change humanity is there. And we can gain a lot in every discipline and every field as this data becomes more democratized and is able to be accessed by different types of people. I'm trying to work right now with Sendhil Mullainathan, who's MacArthur Genius Fellow, who's a professor at Harvard, and he works on behavioral economics for people in poverty, and he wants to use Walmart data in order to basically see, is there some psychology, some tenets of psychology which exist in this data in which we can build a system where we don't go to the data with preconceived notions of this is a tenet of psychology, let's go prove it, but rather say, and John Kleinberg, a famous computer scientist, is also involved with this, how can we use the data to bring back a new feedback loop where it tells us things that we previously didn't know? And the people who are framing these questions and looking for these answers, as you can tell, this is a very diverse group of researchers that are working together, where you have data scientists or computer scientists working alongside economists, which is basically Sendhil's background. So depending on who's asking the question and also what you're trying to achieve, you're going to get completely different types of things coming out of your data.
And building on that in terms of the integration, what's in there, because as you think about the big data, there were 6 panels I counted that explicitly said what these sorts of techniques can get you is the what, but not the why. So often when we're looking, we may be looking at the same facts, but the insights will vary dramatically based on why those facts are there and what could be acted on it for different groups. And that's where whether people in different conditions are using different heuristics, whether people with different goals. So last year's one of Kaggle, the data mining sort of competitions around the one on used cars, basically identified your best quality is orange cars. Orange cars are less likely to be lemons than anything else. The question is, why? It's like if you're selling a car, painted orange, and you've just sent a signal that it's awesome. If you're buying a car, it's a signal. If you're an auto manufacturer, is it because they're less likely to get hit? Does that tell you something about black paint that's chromatic? Or is it about the enthusiasts who buy muscle cars in the early 70s that happen to be orange? So the why is critical, and it has fundamentally different insights and meanings for the different audiences.
Dana?
As for the role of the researcher, one of the things that the advent of technology and the acceleration of growth of technology has done is to marginalize and make less important those market research roles that are focused more on collecting, collating, and reporting data, and puts a premium on the interpretation. I think this is a very good thing for our industry. It's going to reward the people who are already focused on providing the insights and those leaps of insight. There was an interesting and I think germane reference on the discussion board to an anecdote told in Nate Silver's The Signal and the Noise. And for those who aren't familiar, he referenced the book Moneyball, which in some talks about the baseball team, the Oakland Athletics, using analytics to get a competitive advantage over the other teams, which relied more on traditional scouting, which is a very traditional kind of intuition-based approach. And the dialectic in that book was between the quants and the scouts. But what Silver pointed out in his book was that, somewhat ironically, today, after the insights that book generated, they actually spend more on scouting than they did before they started implementing quantitative analysis. So they realize even more just how important it is to have humans to incorporate all the data, the quantitative information as well as what they see the players doing on the field.
Turning the discussion to, I think, to what researchers who are under the gun a little bit, or are maybe feeling that their role is being questioned, can you talk about some strategies that they can use to kind of, convince skeptical audiences, raise their internal profile, just generate or demonstrate the value of what they do in terms of, analyzing the data and synthesizing it, and then also, recommending actions based on it?
I'll briefly answer that question. The necessary skills to analyze big data that is flowing into a company, especially structured data, isn't necessarily that complex. So to append to your current skill set, a new skill set, which is to a certain extent data analysis in these new programs that big data is housed in, will give you a tremendous degree of value that will significantly differentiate yourself from competitors in the environment. And these are very easy to learn. You by no means have to be a math genius or math whiz. You don't even need an IQ beyond the 30th percentile, in my opinion, to really just pick these up simply. So for researchers out there who are worried, you can't change the world, but you can change with it. And I think that maybe picking up some of those skills is valuable, but also just staying on top of how you communicate your value proposition throughout this change to maintain a dialogue that appeals to the people that are at power and are making these decisions may allow you to stay within the ball game.
Yeah, I'll add something. So this is probably a decade ago. I was talking to the Insights head of Mattel, and she told the story I'll never forget. She said that Barbie was losing a lot of momentum in the marketplace in the U.S. for years, in fact, and they saw this thing called Bratz, dolls called Bratz. So they went and did a business review on Barbie and why are we losing penetration on Barbie, and she said, well, we got this whole thing about Bratz. Here's our plan. It wasn't really heard. Next year, did the same thing. Barbie's shares fell down even more. Penetration of Barbie is falling. Bratz is coming up. This comes out with a business review, business plan. We want to really change the trajectory of this brand. Nothing happened again. Third year, have the same discussion. Barbie now is in a spiral downspin. I don't know if it ever recovered. She's in an elevator with the CEO, and the CEO says, "You know what, Vivian, you failed me. You failed me, head of Insights." And she thought, "Why?" She's like, "You didn't tell me what's this Barbie thing? It came out of nowhere. You never told me." She's like, "Well, she knew him pretty well." She said, "Well, wait, I've been telling you for 3 years." She goes, "But you didn't convince me." He held her accountable to being convincible. So if you're in any kind of Insights role, your job is not to give out facts. Your job is not even to figure out the why, honestly. It's not. Lots of people can do that now. Technology is allowing for that. Everybody can become an Insights. Your job now is to convince. It has to be convinced. And you can convince and you design, right? So I'm a big proponent that the future of Insights internally will be to now guide behavior, guide interventions, guide packaging, And in fact, I would even say not even necessarily guide, actually becoming a pseudo-agency, because nobody understands shopping behavior like the shopper insights person. Nobody understands behaviors better than the psychologist at this point. Data helps tremendously, but how to influence people within your own organization and building empathy for those people in your organization, that's where insights. I think that's the number one thing I would do, is really understand empathy and convincing people to take action.
So I think both of the points so far are skill sets, things we could do to sharpen our saws, work more on our influence, basically develop more of the skills in this area. But the fact is on top of that, while that will make us more effective, I'm not sure 30th percentile, but not much higher, could master this. But that means every person in the company, not just market research, has that potential. Every person in the company has the potential to become a dynamic influencer. What market research has is not just the task, the focus on that consumer, but what we can understand is the different types of data, that the passive data, the big data analysis, there are surprise insights that could come out of that. But that then needs to be linked with our active research. So whether it be qualitative ethnographic, whether it be quantitative research, and as we move into more and more of an interactive relationship with our customers themselves, those are three types of data that your finance person is not going to be looking at those through the consumer lens. That's where market research, the balance of them is shifting. Not as much as some of my clients who say surveys are dead. I'm like, there will be a role for that active research, but I think market research can really bring together the three pieces with skills to understand all of them and the ability to influence through that.
Dana?
I would say the other thing that's really needed is just general management and leadership skills, because now more than ever we have a landscape that's changing that you need to look at through a fresh manner, and you can't do that alone, no matter how many skills you have. So you need to have, your team is going to have lots of different people with lots of skill sets. They're going to be investigating different things. They're going to be looking at different tools, and no one person is going to be able to integrate everything. So you need to run a team where you encourage people to speak up, to share ideas, to challenge you. And then you need to, in turn, be able to, as your story indicated, you need to be able to speak forcefully and with leadership within the organization.
I think just in the interest of time, I'll just do one more quick question, then we can open it to the audience. I was wondering how will we know when we're making progress, when our standing is increasing? I mean, is it going to take a series of tiny little victories, or big wins, or how do you think we'll know when we've made some progress? Anyone? Nobody? We won't.
It's almost obvious to me. So I think there's some kind of hidden meaning in the question.
No,
right?
no.
I guess it's when the downtimes go down, right? And your company's firing marketing and insights, or laying off, or whatever. When that stops happening, because they see you as an asset as opposed to a cost center. That's the true indication, I think, of whether or not, or where your value is, I guess, in the company.
Sure.
Financials.
And I think a leading indicator of that, because I think that will be clear, but to me, research is only really relevant as it's acted on by the business. So as the insights turn into business interventions that are valued by the company, that is, to me, the success that will lead to job security.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think that taking the data and building something that can allow you to then create an entire marketing program around will be where the success comes from, and that success, again, is basically there when you're at the table with who handles the data and is doing the data analysis, such that good business practices can come from the insights that the data is giving us. So as soon as we really start to see full-fledged marketing programs, not big data automated programs, but also just really well-developed marketing programs that also sit within this data ecosystem and live with the data, I think that's when we'll see that true harmony of both sides coming together to build a strong foundation that businesses can thrive on.
I would concur with everything that was said here. I think it's going to be very unique to each individual and each organization. And I think many organizations, as we've seen here, are well on the way. So I think it's something that each person should just kind of look inward and see where things stand. And I think collectively we'll continue to rise.
Sure. We've got a couple minutes left. Any questions out there from the audience?
I have more of a comment than a question.
Sure.
In more decades than I like to admit of being an active marketing researcher, I would say our biggest problem is we are too focused on data, and then we decide, well, now we'll talk about insights, but it's still fragmented. And we're just sort of like poking little holes in the balloon so we can see inside what reality looks like. Maybe as researchers we need to focus on building and creating knowledge, and then being able to effectively share that knowledge. I love when we talk about the brand consumer experience and we present findings, and we do it in the most excruciating way possible with lots of little tiny bits of information, data, and graphs. I mean, the irony of that is just wonderful.
Anyone else? Okay, sure.
I am in the 30th percentile, but just, okay? So could you suggest a good author or book that I could read up on getting some good analytical skills to supplement my skills and insight?
Sure. I'm sure you're not giving yourself the credit that's due. But there are, thanks to the internet, many sources for you to receive information. Coursera has some courses on R. R is a little bit more complicated and may not necessarily be required for someone who's trying to achieve what I was outlining. But Hive is the SQL version, which is basically a very simple database analysis tool that runs on Hadoop. And Hive, I think, will be the main place that data will be able to be analyzed. And Hive is very similar to SQL. There's a book now on Hive that you can use, and it's downloadable online. And there's also w3schools.com, which is a very simple tutorial on SQL. And the syntax in SQL and Hive is very similar, but it's a little bit different. And the best thing to do is obviously to play around with it and actually get your hands dirty rather than reading about it. So if there's ways that you can find to actually analyze real data, which you can find information online on how to do that, then that's the best way. But W3 Schools and then a book on Apache Hive would be your best bet. And then if you get more fancy, a course on R on Coursera, or any data analysis course on R, or any data analysis course in general on Coursera would be good. And then also universities obviously are offering tons of online courses because they realize there's going to be a huge demand for these skills in the industry, and they're trying to meet the interests of potential students who want to meet that demand.
Anybody else? Sure, over there. Hi, Mark.
I'm a quali, and I see there's no qualies up there to talk about humans. And I was just wondering, I saw this thing with Morgan Freeman the other night, the Into the Wormhole show, and it was talking about how they're trying to teach machines how to have thinking process, and they said they can't think without emotions. And so they're actually trying to teach the machines how to have emotions by having more sensory inputs. Now, bringing this back to mobile, as we have these sensories devices, basically the device has a bunch of sensors in it, I'm wondering, from a quality perspective, how do we put more emotion into data? A lot, as we heard over here earlier, is there a thinking process that's centered around emotional findings? And just give you one more example on that, the orange car thing made me think of purple cars. If we did a survey on favorite colors, we'd find purple is really one of the top choices, especially among women, but we don't see a lot of purple cars out there. Is that an emotional thing or is that a machine thing? Just
so I can kind of see you. So yeah, I don't want to portray myself as a data head at all. I've actually in the last 10 years focused mostly on quality and looking at behavioral economics, right? And you're right, all behaviors, all decisions, everything we ever do in this world, every decision, 17,000 decisions a day are based upon emotion, absolutely. And that emotion, it's funny how big data has allowed us now to create faster, better insights, right? But really don't explain human behavior at all. You still need to look at it through a behavioral lens, so an emotional lens. Here's what mobile does for us, right? Here's what we've always, the holy grail of, I think, behavioral sciences has been context. Context matters, always, in all environments, right? The temperature in this room, my voice, my mannerisms, whether you guys ate breakfast or not, are actually influencing whether you're going to listen to me right now. Context now is able to be monitored, right? So cameras are huge, right? Understanding and taking videos, having people talk and sentiment analysis off of your voice, right? There's some new technologies that are out there now that are starting to understand when you're talking, what's the emotions that you're feeling. So technology and the mobile allows us to get there. I always wonder this. This is what bothers me about it, though. So what? So I get a picture of a room. I get a lot of people, you look excited. You don't look very excited right now, but what do I do with that, right? So it's interesting to understand, well, let's hear a little bit of the why. I'm a big believer in you now need to understand emotions through some sort of behavioral lens. And that could be a personal lens, a social lens, or an environmental lens. And there are heuristics that we know through the last 30 years off of Kahneman's work that would tell us that there's maybe 100 different, I don't know, I've seen numbers as 20 different heuristics that we all use, judgments, that, or mental models that we use to make decisions, and as much as 100. 100 heuristics isn't really all that hard to follow, or isn't that hard to find. So all that being said, if I take a video of this room, and if I know there's about 100 different factors to look for, that's where I think the power and understanding the emotion, because now I can replicate that heuristic. If I understand, wow, it's scarcity. Scarcity is a big factor, I think, in this environment. Therefore, I'm going to deploy scarcity effect into a new piece of marketing or whatever, because I know scarcity effect will drive a human emotion called, one of the 8 human emotions called anxiety or whatever. I think that's what mobile allows us to do that we've never had that chance to do. But I think you have to take it, not just doing the videotape and saying, man, people look really happy in here. Interesting. That's really interesting to do. And it makes great videos for decks. But it's now what do I go do with that? I think it's through behavioral economics. And that's where my passion is behavioral economics of deploying that. And that's all qualitative, I think.
And actually, just building on that, because I would say that emotion is going to be very important. We're improving, actually. There's a session coming up on neuroscience. We have more sensors, more ways. The mobile device is going to get us to that. A lot of the qualitative work is key. The question does come down to what do you do with it and how does it work? But I think we're only starting to integrate that with the other types of research to really grasp all of the potentials on how it can how it influences and how it will, as much as the cognitive psychology and behavioral economics has developed. How that will play out in our industries is intriguing. And to your last point, purple cars actually were the worst cars. So if you could figure out the insights from both extremes.
Right. Any other questions? One quick one? Okay. Oh, back there. Anybody?
Not wanting to pitch, but from the supplier side, I think that not every company is going to be able to build the infrastructure that Walmart has, obviously. That's where third parties will be able to fill that gap for companies that can't build the infrastructure for themselves. That's where partnerships are going to develop. So I think, and the view is that big data is going to make research dirt cheap because all you need to do is social listening and you're done. And that's where you're not going to get all the actionable insights you need. but there will be services and resources that can level the playing field.
Will, Dana? Oh. Anything?
I totally understand your comment. There's a heavy cost associated with big data as of now, and as you mentioned, there are companies that are stepping in, including Google, that's now building, a small business kind of ad platform. I have a friend at a company called AdLast that's trying to bring in search engine marketing and other things to smaller companies where they can pay for it as a service rather than develop tools that they have to build themselves. So I think that is a valid point. I think there will be, as big data gets cheaper and given what Amazon has done with the cloud, there will be a time where there's this pseudo kind of form of big data in which you're doing some stuff and you're paying for other stuff. But regardless of that, being aware of what's going on in your industry and how your competitors are handling it and how you can stay competitive will be critical, because big data definitely is going to get bigger, faster, and cheaper. So I understand what you're saying as of now, but as the future plays out, we'll see what happens.
I think that's about all we have time for. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much.